Okay, today I'm going to show you how to install or how to create and install an SSL certificate for use with Tomcat specifically. Because what happens with customers is most of the time they have, well, if they have an IT staff and they use IIS, usually the IT staff takes care of that. And most of them know how to create an SSL certificate for IIS. But a lot of them struggle with the Tomcat one. And some of them don't even use IIS in front. And so for the ones that only use Tomcat and wants to have SSL inside of Tomcat directly, uh, this video is going to show how to do that. Um, if for any reason you need to install something in IIS directly, because you got the IIS redirector, for example, um, there's tons of documentation on the Microsoft website and other websites on how to create and install a certificate for IIS. So I'm not going to go through that. Okay, for Tomcat, a few little concepts first. I've created a little graphic file for that here, and I'll make that file available as well as the little mini KB article, if you will. Because the one we have already a KB article in our system for SSL and Tomcat, but it's very longish and I'm not sure how really up to date it really is. Plus, like if I open that one here, it's just a few lines. Basically, that's all you really need once you understand how it works. So there's no point for pages and pages of instructions on that. Now, created, like I said, a little file, a little graphic to illustrate a little bit how the process is done for SSL with Tomcat. Basically, very simply, uh, because Tomcat is a Java web server and everything is based out of Java, you need to create all that with Java tools. Um, those tools are installed with the JDK. The same JDK we use basically to deploy the web with in EDC. So you need to have that JDK installed on your machine to generate the files for SSL. Um, and I'll make an example on creating one for my own machine here. It's not going to be a real certificate though, but it will illustrate some points out of it. It's useful. Um, so you do, like I said, you do need the JDK installed. If you don't have that, that's the first thing you have to do. And most of the time, and because it's the JDK itself, theoretically, you don't need, let's say you need to install that for customer A, okay? Well, you don't really need to go and install that on or create those files on the customer server. Most of the time anyway, the server itself, the web server won't have the JDK because that's not where the web is deployed from. It's usually deployed from the web server, the EDC server, I mean. So you could go in theory, go to their server and use their JDK from there to create all those files. But you don't really need that because the JDK is pretty much, uh, 99% compatible all across everywhere. I've seen one time, I think, and it might have been another mistake where I've tried to create that on my own machine, imported it over there, and then I had a problem. But in general, the JDK is the JDK. Wherever you run it, it's the same stuff everywhere. So it should be fine. Meaning you should be able to do the basic stuff on your own machine if you have the JDK on your own machine, like we're gonna do here today, because I do have it on my machine. Okay, make a long story short, the Tomcat web server, okay, as seen here, um, two components of interest to us. One of them is the key store. They call it the Java key store. The key store is basically just a container that stores all the SSL certificates in there. So Tomcat itself, the web server, when it needs to look at any SSL information for websites, because you can have many websites inside Tomcat, it goes and looks into the key store for SSL information. So it stores all the SSL information in that key store. So one of the things we have to do is create that key store. The key store is basically just a file. If you look it on disk, it's just a file with an extension, dot key store. Although you could call it whatever. The actual extension doesn't matter. Um, so the first, and these, like I say here, all these little things, like I said, they're all done with the command line utilities from the JDK. So one of the first things we do, we create the key store itself. If we're only creating just a basic certificate for our own machine, um, say we want to use just for a demo machine or something that's not important, something that's customers are not really going to see, then actually at that point, that's the only step you really need to do. You create the key store. The key store, in effect, will also contain a self-signed certificate when you create it. And so then all you have to do at this point is modify the config file, the server XML file inside Tomcat, the SSL information in there. There's connector information for SSL in there. And if you just, configure it to use your key store normally, then right away you do have um, an SSL you can use for your own demo machine. But in general, you don't do that for customers because real SSL certificates are issued by a certificate authority, they call it. And this is the little guy here, number 3. Certificate authorities are just companies that are well known to deliver SSL certificates and that those companies are reputable amongst web organizations. So everybody, for example, know that VeriSign or GoDaddy, there's many of them out there, but this is just 2 examples. But these 2 guys are known to issue SSL certificate, and they're not just that, but they're also known to be reputable companies that you can trust. And so a real browser, when it goes to an HTTPS address, it doesn't just look for the fact that the web server has an SSL certificate. It actually looks to see if the certificate can be trusted, they call it. And it can only be trusted if it comes from a CA. So if you just do a self-signed certificate like this on your machine and you try to use that in a browser, the browser will always complain that your certificate cannot be trusted because it doesn't come from a CA. And so, like I said, that's good for demo stuff, but that's not good for real production stuff. So basically, again, if I go through the cycle here, what we have to do, we have to create the key store first. And then we create a CSR, a certificate signing request. That's just basically a little encryption key that the CA will require in order to generate the real SSL certificates. So we create the CSR as well on anywhere where the JDK is. So once we do have the CSR, after creating the key store, then we go to a company, say like GoDaddy or something, and where you can purchase an SSL certificate. And as part of the process of purchasing the SSL certificate or renewing it or whatever, the CA will ask you for the CSR because it needs that to generate your real SSL. And this is just also just the text file basically. So you open the text file, there's a little encryption key in there usually, and you copy and paste that into a place where the CA on their website will tell you to do so. And after that, the CA will generate your SSL certificate. It could take a few minutes usually. And then they will either email it to you or you can go and fetch it in some other place. Once the CA has generated the certificate, they usually come in a bundle of 1, 2, or 3. Sorry, 1, 2, or 3 files. One of them is usually called the root certificate. It may have other names for it. And one of them is the real SSL certificate. Um, Also to note though is even though I do have my own instructions here on how to do all that, sometimes and you may want to use my instructions first, and if it doesn't work, check somewhere else. But in general, say for example, because here at DocuData we have our certificates at GoDaddy. So when I renew or I buy something from GoDaddy themselves also has their own set of instructions on how to configure and install because those certificates here, they need to be installed in the key store with some other command lines from the JDK. But how to install that in the key store and how to modify your server XML to reflect all that. Usually the CA also has their own set of instructions on how to do that. Um, Although all these instructions are usually a derivative of the real SSL instructions that come from the documentation of Tomcat. So if you're ever stuck somewhere, you can also look for the Tomcat documentation. So that's about it for the overview, really. So we create the key store, create the CSR, send the CSR to the CA. The CA gives us back the real certificates. Step 4, we import those certificates back into the key store, and then we configure the server XML file to point to the key store, and that's it. And then we try out our URL and see how it goes. So from that, we're just going to follow my instructions quickly, and we'll try to create a simple certificate on my machine. It's not going to be like creating a real one, just for the fact that I'm not actually going to go to GoDaddy and purchase a certificate right now to put on my own machine, but most of the steps will be the same. You'll see. Um, so if I open my file here, I say create the key store in the path of your choice. Me, I always put them in the C drive because this is less stuff to type. That usually you can just put that command straight up into your command line prompt and it will work. Me on my machine though, it didn't work because my Java home environment variable was not set. And so on some machine it's not even set at all. So you could go through the trouble of creating the environment variable, but I'm not gonna do that. I know that my key tool here basically is in the JDK bin directory. So what I'm gonna do is just go to the bin and use that. And the JDK for me is always a 32-bit one, so I go to my x86 folder, Java JDK right here. I go to the bin, right? And then I copy my path right there. Okay. Then I open my command prompt and I CD right into it. Okay, now I'm in the bin of my JDK. So from this point on, all I have to do is follow the instructions. Oh, not follow it, but just, I can just copy that part of the key of the path here because I'm already in the bin. So basically the key tool is going to generate the key store. And with this switch here at the end, it specifies basically where I want to save my key store and what name I want to have it. Me, I called it my.keystore. You could call it whatever you like. It could be keystore.java or, I wouldn't try to use some crazy file extension names, but, or if it's for a company, you could call it, I don't know, this is my support PC, right? So I'm going to call it, let's say support, my machine is support 01, so support01.keystore, right? That could work well. So I'm just going to copy that and paste that in there. And then the key tool, basically, that creates this key store, will ask me a bunch of questions. Uh, these questions are quite important in the fact that that's all these answers I'm going to put in there is what the browser is going to be able to verify later on to make sure my SSL matches. So press enter here. First thing it asks me is for a password for the key store. Okay, I gotta put something in there, and it has to be, I think, 6 letters minimum. In that Java doc, in the documentation for the SSL, they say that they usually use change me as a or change it or something like that as a default password. Me, I'm just gonna use docudata for now. Okay, Docudata. Okay, enter it again. What is your first and last name? This, when they ask you for that, normally if you create a certificate for a real company, that would usually be the domain name. So if I wanted to create one for Docudata, I would go, www.docudatasoft.com, say. But me, I'm just doing that on my own local machine here. So I'm just gonna call it localhost, okay? Because I'm doing it for my local machine. I could probably also have used my machine name. Like if you go in Windows here and you check your see, my machine name is support01-new. I could have probably used that, but it's too long to type, so I'm not gonna use that. So localhost, enter. What is the name of your organizational unit, whatever? I'm just gonna say, support. That's just, you can put pretty much whatever you like in there, but it has to be kind of as close as possible to the truth, anyways, especially if you create a real one there. So, name of your organization, okay, support. Name of city, Montreal. Okay, name of state, Quebec. Two-letter country, this is Canada, so it's CA. If it's in the US, it's probably just US. You have to look it up for that. Okay, now it's kind of, just checking, is that right? Is your name localhost support? Make sure that this is correct. If it's correct, I enter yes in here. If I wanted to correct any of these things, I would just press enter, because the default here, when you press enter, when it's in bracket like that, that's the default value when you press enter. So it would create no, and then it would have me probably correct some stuff or redo it from scratch. But I'm gonna do yes here. I'm saying this is okay. Okay. Enter the password for Tomcat. Tomcat meaning the self-signed certificate here, the normal Tomcat certificate inside the key store. Because when you create the key store, it always create this self-signed certificate anyways. So I'm also gonna call it Docudata, just so that everything is the same password everywhere. I don't have to worry too much about all that. You could use a different one if you wanted to, but then you have to track, what's your self-signed certificate password, what's your key store certificate, and so it could get complicated. So now this is all done here. I'm back to my command line. So if I look now, I said to create that in my C drive. So if I go look in my C drive, I should have my key store in here called support01.keystore. So let's have a look. And it's right here. All right, so my key store is created now. Good. Now, basically, if all I want to do is create SSL for my own machine, I'm pretty much done at this point. All I have to do is modify my server XML file in Tomcat, and I'm done. But assuming we're doing that on a real machine for a real certificate, there's more to do here. The second step is to create the CSR, as seen from that second step here, right? My key store is already created. Now I have to create a CSR. To create a CSR, basically the same thing, but you have to have you use basically this command line here, right? And and for what key store you want to create that for, and that's the one I created here. So I'm just gonna actually just change that, paste that in here. So it's the same. This is the name and the path of your CSR where it's gonna put it. Again, I put it in the C drive. certrec.csr is just a basic name. You could use whatever name you want. It doesn't matter. Actually, I'm gonna change that. support 01. Because let's say you're creating CSRs for a bunch of websites, then it might be hard to differentiate for which website you're doing your files for if it's always the same weird name. So I'm gonna run that, and that's gonna create the CSR for my SSL I want to do. Enter key store password. That was docudata. Enter. Okay, my CSR should be done now. If I look back into my, and here it is. All right. Now this is just a text file, a normal text file. And if I open that, I usually right click and open with TextPad. Here you go. That's my CSR. That's the encryption key I was talking about earlier on that the CA will ask you for in order to create the real SSL. And usually when they ask you for it, they will ask for it, with those lines included. So you kind of have to go like that, select everything, and copy and paste all that. But for now, we're not going to go to a CA. So this is where it's going to stop for that part. Because here I'm saying, request your SSL certificate at CA and use the CSR created in step 2. So you would keep that CSR file before you go to GoDaddy and they ask you all that stuff. And then, like I said, here in step 3, after these guys have issued the certificates to you, you'll have to import them into the key store. Now, these are some of the command line that you would have to use to import them. And basically it says this one would be to import the root one, and minus key store for the location of your key store. So if like for me here you changed your key store name to this, of course then you have to change the key store name to reflect that. So whatever name you use for your key store, that's what you have to use. So here, again, I would go like this, and I would change my key store name for the same one I created. And then it asks you, minus file, and then in here you would have to put the path to your certificate root. It might be, I don't know, C root dot. Sometimes they come in a bunch of different extension names. A lot of them is actually, I think it's CSR again, or no, I don't think it's CSR. It's something else. I don't remember, but just that extension there. So that's the kind of stuff you'd have to put there. And same thing for this one. When you import your real SSL certificate in the key store, put back your real key store name, and your. So let's say I use something like C, and that's assuming you've put them in the C root, the stuff that you received from GoDaddy. Say, I don't know where you've put them, but wherever they are, you'd use the path for that, or you can move them to the C, make it easier. So it could be SSL dot extension, whatever it is. I don't know. Once the um, once those documents basically have been imported into the key store, then you're ready to go. All you have to do is change your configuration in your server XML of Tomcat, and you're done. So me, I've just done this basic self-signed certificate here, but nonetheless, I need to change my connector. So I'm going to copy that right away. Um, and I'm going to change that right away to support.keystore here as well, because that's the name that I've created. So I need water. Just a second. Okay, I'm back. Okay, so I've put the key store file name in the path right here, and my key store password. This change it as the default one if you don't put a new one in there. But me, we've changed it for docu data. So I'm putting that in there. And so I'm just going to copy all that. Now I need to go to the server XML in Tomcat. So for me, Tomcat is installed. It's a 64-bit machine, and so it's under over here. And in the comp folder, I have my server XML file. Usually the first thing I do though is at this point I would shut down Tomcat. So I'll just shut it down. And then I make a copy, I make a backup basically of the server XML file. So if I need to come back to it for any reason, if something goes wrong, I got it right here. I can just rename it back to that. So I'm gonna open that, and that's my server XML file. Quite a few things in there, although we don't need to worry about much in here. The only thing we need to do is there's usually this normal connector. These are called connectors. This is usually the normal one that doesn't have any SSL on it. Sometimes that will be changed to just port 80. So if you see that on port 80 is the same thing. Basically, we have to comment that out. Because when something is commented like this, it's not used, right? So we basically need to kind of remove, if you will, the normal, because we just want to use SSL from now on. So I'm just gonna basically just grab that comment, put it at the end over here, so that the comment has got everything now from here to here. So basically this won't be used anymore. So now I need to go to my, and right here, I got this. This is the normal standard one that comes with the Tomcat configuration. But like, we needed to change it to this guy. So basically I just need to copy that. I select that and I replace it with my one I copied before, which has my key store. Okay. And my password. But as you'll see though, the SSL connector by default is commented out. So I need to take those comments right out of there so that it becomes used by Tomcat. All right. And I put it on the normal 444 port. That's the normal SSL port. By default, Tomcat will want to use 8443 for its SSL port. That's just so that it doesn't conflict with things that are already SSL on a certain server by default. But for us, I don't have any of that. So everywhere else in the file where I see 8443, I just put 443 there. So I just erase that over here. And I keep going down. I think there's nothing else. No, there's none. So basically, that's all there is to it. Now, if I save my XML file, I'll save my howto file as well. And I minimize that. Now this is done there. So I can restart my Tomcat at this point. And I should have SSL right away under localhost. So if I open my browser, let's test it out. See what happens. HTTPS. So I'm just gonna go localhost. Okay, and see what we get. Oh, right. It says it's untrusted, but it works, right? It works in the sense that my connection to the web server does work. And it is secured, but it says it's untrusted, right? And if I look in the technical details here, it says Localhost used an invalid certificate, right? It's not trusted because it is self-signed. And that's what we said earlier on in the drawing here, meaning if you just self-sign your own certificate this way and you don't have something that actually comes out of a CA, that's what the browser will complain about. It says you just signed that yourself, basically. That doesn't come from someone we know and someone we trust like GoDaddy. So, you you can get out of here, or you can understand the risk and trust that this connection is not as bad as we think it is. And if I understand the risk, and I okay, add exception, confirm certificate, blah blah blah, then boom, it lets me go in anyway, right? And if you look at the top, I'm really on an SSL mode at this point. I'm HTTPS with my local host. So it did work, except that the browser complained that it was not trusted, right? But that's fine. If it's just for me on my own demo, that's cool. That's no problem. So now the only difference here from a real certificate is just the fact that, I just created the key store. I generated my CSR, but I didn't submit it to a CA. And so because I didn't get those certificates back and I didn't import them back into my key store, then I got this error. But if I had went and sent my CSR to GoDaddy, GoDaddy would have given me those two things, say, and I would have imported them in my key store via the command lines, those ones here, right? I would have imported them in there, and then I would still have put the same thing here. That wouldn't have changed because I imported those or not. The location of the key store is still the same and still use the same password. So, and then it wouldn't have complained at all. It would have just straight up put me here. But the thing is that when you're doing it on a real server for a real customer, these guys usually have a real domain name. So they will have something like activeweb.company.com, And so when we created the CSR originally and all that and the key store, we would have had to put, activeweb dot something instead of localhost to generate the key store and the CSR. Um, Now, sometimes you can also, instead of, like I've put localhost and when I generated that, um, some certificates are called wildcard certificates also, where you can have a certificate that will allow any subdomain on it as well. And so I think for those though, and you may have to read Tomcat's documentation on that, but I think you would have to use um, instead of localhost or activeweb dot, I think you have to use star dot company.com to allow that, but I'm not very sure about that. That might be something to check. So, and that's about it. So I'll make these two files, well, the mini how-to and um, the graphic file available to you when I send you the email now. I'll put them on the server somewhere or on our S drive somewhere. Um, and yeah, that's about it. So if there's any questions about it, let me know. Okay, bye.